Hey everyone, my name is Dexter, and today I'm going to talk about the Elizabeth Smart kidnapping. I chose this case not only because it has a personal effect on me. I grew up in Utah when this happened. I was 7. I remember being very fearful of being kidnapped out of my room. But I think from this case, we can also learn a lot about the etiology of violent crime as well as rape. Elizabeth Smart was born 1987 and grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah. Her family lived in a large home, and Brian David Mitchell had previously been re-roofing the family's home where she lived. Elizabeth Smart was 14 at the time of the kidnapping and shared a room with her sister, who was an important part of the case, and we will discuss her involvement later. On June 5th, 2002, Smart was kidnapped by knife point in her home by Brian David Mitchell. When roofing the home, he had scouted where her room was. He came in through the window late at night and threatened to kill her and her family if she made any noise. He led her through the house to the back door. He then took her to the woods behind the house to meet his wife, Wanda Barzay. To provide a background on Brian David Mitchell, he was born in 1953 in Salt Lake City to a large and strict family. Brian exposed himself to a child as a teenager and was sent to juvenile detention center. Brian also had two failed previous marriages before meeting Wanda, and strained relationships with his children. In fact, he had tried to kidnap children from his first marriage and had sexually assaulted children from his second marriage. Brian also had a history of alcohol and drug abuse. Wanda Barzay was born in 1945 in Salt Lake City, Utah. She was also a divorcee, and one of her children described her as the evilest woman on earth and claimed that she had actually fed the children their pet rabbit one night for dinner. Brian and Wanda were both active in the LDS Church at the beginning of their marriage. They left the church together, and Brian began to go by the name Emmanuel, claiming to be a prophet of God. Wanda went along with this and renamed herself Hephzibah. Brian and David both began to wear white tunics and robes, and Brian began to grow a beard because he felt the need to be akin to Jesus Christ. Brian claimed to have received revelation that he needed to marry many virgin wives. After kidnapping Elizabeth Smart, Wanda washed Elizabeth's feet and forced her to change into the white tunic and robes and veil. And from that point, pretty much until Smart's release 9 months later, she was repeatedly raped daily by Brian Mitchell. And she was also forced to drink alcohol, which was against her beliefs. The three remained in an encampment near Salt Lake City until September of 2002. During that time, both Mitchell and Barzay kept Smart, chained to a tree, fed drugs to weaken her, and only small amounts of food. Sometimes only trash, so that she would submit herself to Mitchell's sexual desires. She was constantly threatened and abused during her captivity. Her and her captors moved by San Diego a few months after their time in Salt Lake, and they moved there by walking there. They avoided detection by the police on multiple times, and one time Elizabeth even lied to the police out of fear about who she really was. Around the time that this was happening, Smart's sister, Mary Catherine, who pretended to be asleep during the kidnapping, suddenly remembered the voice of the captor. And it turned out to be Emmanuel. Shortly after this was released to the press, Brian Mitchell's family identified him as the kidnapper, and his image was released to the media. In March of 2003, a woman in Sandy, Utah, because Elizabeth and Brian and the three had moved back to Utah, recognized Elizabeth Smart walking around with Wanda Brian. She called the police, and after 9 long months, Elizabeth Smart was finally returned to her family, and Wanda and Brian were placed under arrest. After a lengthy court battle regarding Mitchell's sanity to stand trial on December 11th, 2010, a jury found him guilty of kidnapping and transporting a minor across state lines with the intent to engage in sexual activity. He has life without parole at a prison in Tucson, and momentarily we'll discuss what happened with Wanda Barzay. In this case, we can learn about rape and sexual assault. First of all, the offender was an acquaintance of the victim, which is common in 75% of rape cases. Psychiatric perspectives can also explain Mitchell's behavior. Mitchell experienced sexual trauma as a child by his father repeatedly showing him pornographic images, and we also learned that Brian exposed himself as a teenager, which is common with rape offenders. Mitchell's would be described under the power-assertive typology of rape. He wasn't explicitly trying to harm Smart with his actions, but assert authority over her. This was shown by starving and drugging Smart to submit to his mind games and sexual desires. Rydell and Walsh also mentioned that alcohol and drug use is common with rape offenders. In fact, alcohol and drug use may be a major explanation for Barzeh and Mitchell's actions. Mitchell had a strong history of drug and alcohol use. Fagan's 1990 situational transactional theory can provide a framework for Mitchell's actions. The theory argues that alcohol has an impact on cognitive abilities, but this varies by substance, individual, social setting, and context. We know Mitchell consumed a lot of alcohol, but we are not sure what kind of drugs he took in order to modify his behavior. Good in 2007 also argued that setting, and pharmacological effects can lead to aggressive behavior with drug abuse. Set relates to the person's perceived reality, which for Mitchell was the fact that he thought he was a prophet and had dominion over Barzeh and Smart. Setting involves with whom you were taking the drugs with, which was Smart and Barzeh, who submitted to his authority. And finally, pharmacological effects relates to the neurological behavioral change. The alcohol Mitchell consumed, along with the drugs he took, really affected his brain chemistry and led to these violent acts. As we discussed in the lecture, the myophonia model can also be applied to this case by the misuse of alcohol and drugs that led to the ability-making decision of Mitchell being impaired and thinking it was okay to kidnap Smart and repeatedly rape her every day. Disinhibition can also be applied to the possibility that Mitchell was unable to control his sexual desires when consuming alcohol. Whatever the case be, there's significant evidence that alcohol and drugs related affected Smart's kidnappers. As far as aftermath, the media nation Elizabeth Smart herself were shocked by the release of Wanda Barzeh on good behavior last year. She will be on parole for the next 5 years. Several TV specials have been made about this case, including a major Lifetime movie. Elizabeth Smart later got married, and now has children. She has created a foundation to help people who have been kidnapped and sexually assaulted. She has a new TV series launching later this year that deals with her work in this organization. So I think from this case we can see that there's a lot of evidence that we can learn about the etiology of violence and rape. Thank you today for listening to my presentation.